This week in IT SPARC Cast, Russian hackers are happy you didn't upgrade to Windows 11. FFmpeg tells Google to put up or shut up. And Santa Clara says, no juice for you.
No juice for your data center.
Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast News Bytes. I'm your host, John Barker.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's go see what's going on out there. It's been a weird week.
It's been a weird week. It is Monday, November 17th. IT SPARC Cast News Bytes is a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors. And now for the News Bytes.
And this one, I got to say, is going to go a little bit more on the expert side, corner case side. There is no single thing that really wraps this together, but we saw some examples this week that I think are very, very useful to think about. And let's start with this one. Last week, we had a plane crash. It was really unfortunate. UPS lost an aircraft. It was an MD-11. What many folks may know or may not know, that a lot of the aircraft that go out of service for passengers have a long and fulfilling life in the cargo realm. And what will happen is air transport companies will fly these things for a long time, and sometimes things happen. Why are we talking about this? Because if you are an enterprise hardware individual, whether it's servers that you manage yourself in your data center, network elements most commonly, you have to have a sparing strategy. If you are going to bring in a spare, whether you put it on site or 4 hours or 8 hours or 24 hours or a week, usually that's part of your negotiation with a vendor, normally a partner, when you are buying your new gear. What happened with this plane crash is all of the carrier services took their MD-11s out of service. Now, we don't know how many that is, but that is definitely going to impact how much they can get through. Unless, if your sparing strategy depends on 24 hours, it might be at the other end of an airlink. You need to go and review how this stuff is getting to you and make sure that the carrier that you have selected or your channel has selected is able to deliver in your timeframes, because this type of disaster is tragic, but it will really hit home if you see a major failure on a system that you don't have a backup for. So it's a shorty, but it's one that I would advise you go and look at.
Yeah, so what I like about this article is it's just a little inside baseball. When Lou and I were reviewing this, I saw that he had put this in, and I'm like, what does UPS have to do with enterprise IT? And then he walked through that sparing strategy and thinking about that. I want to take this up another level. Is in IT, we need to be thinking about news that we're hearing and how does it impact us if it's not obvious. And there's lots of things going on out there. We know the price of memory is going up because of the AI demand. That's going to increase the cost of our laptops and our computers and other systems that we are buying, and therefore we need to budget differently. There's all these things that go on in the news that if you think of it as a chain of events, can impact IT and our jobs. So that's, I think, a really good message to take away, and big, kudos for Lou for thinking of that on this article. And so just think about that in general. We're going to try to bring those things to you as well. So keep listening to us, but definitely be thinking about how those news articles that are out there could impact what you're doing. That will then also potentially elevate you in your job as you're bringing these things to your higher ups and saying, hey, we need to think about this. It's going to show that you're a strategic thinker, and then could elevate you in your job.
This is very operationally relevant. And speaking of operationally relevant, a little bit of a kerfluffle is broken out on X/Twitter. Why don't you walk us through it, John?
Yeah, so this came from, we saw this on NewStack.io, and FFmpeg is the developer of a small command line based video player, and it's used in many, many different tools.
It's everywhere.
It's used everywhere. And they are the maintainers of that. It's an open source project, are calling out Google for overwhelming their project with steady bug flows ever since Google started including it in their large-scale fuzzing systems. And so it's really kind of interesting. What they've done is they've actually gone to Google and said, back off, stop sending us so many bugs, you're overwhelming us, or start contributing to the project, either through code or through money, and help us get through this. And so there's a couple of interesting things we wanted to talk about here. So the first was contributing to the open source projects that you use is a good idea. It gives you skin in the game. It lets them know that you're involved and you're a cooperative partner, and you might get more attention. But also, I want to talk about the fact that I understand FFmpeg getting overwhelmed, but these are legitimate bugs. So to say back off is probably not the right way to do it. I think what they're really saying is, why don't you contribute more than stop sending us the bugs? And I think that's the message that we want to take there. And again, the strategy should be for you, if you're using open source, and guaranteed you are, that you should be contributing in some form, whether that's monetary, whether that's support, whether that's actually submitting code, whatever it might be, to support those projects. And then again, that's going to give you the clout necessary to make those requests. Hey, we need you to fix this. We need you to add this feature. You're going to be more likely to be heard.
You know, another thing, if we talked a couple of weeks ago about Google coming up with a new service that used DeepMind that would actually find these bugs. And fuzzing, by the way, is a technique of looking for buffer overruns by deliberately bonking the code and seeing what it does. Google came up with something called Code Mender. This is an excellent example of where something like Code Mender, where an AI system can look at the code and at least propose an update, could streamline the workflow for open source products. We know that open source underpins 99% of how the internet functions. We're all being held up by tiny little things that can break.
Yep.
So
that's true for like AI. That's true for, many of the systems that we use. Many of the network gear run Linux underneath. Most of it does. So,
and anyway. Speaking of Linux, you're gonna love this one.
This is another episode of Really Microsoft.
Really? But this is sneaky, and I had a really good discussion on X with folks about this, and I thought it was worth bringing up. Hackers weaponize Windows Hyper-V to hide a Linux VM and evade EDR detection in your security system. Why did I put this in the main line instead of a CVE? This is absolutely fascinating. So let me tell you what they did. A threat actor known as Curly Comrades has been using Microsoft Hyper-V on compromised Windows 10 machines to spin up hidden lightweight Linux virtual machines. That's via the Hacker News. And with those, they use Alpine Linux, which can be tightened down pretty good. But I'm going to give you an example that's even scarier, right? Alpine Linux VMs, they run custom malware tools named Curly Shell, a reverse shell, and Curly Cat, a reverse proxy, to stay under the radar of endpoint detection solutions, right? So by routing all VM traffic through the host's IP via Hyper-V's NAT default switch, if the attackers effectively mask malicious communication as legitimate host traffic. The campaign targets entities in regions like Georgia and Moldova and is assessed to have ties and alignment with Russian interests. Okay, so before I talk about potential mitigation, let me bring you a concept, because people say, oh, virtual machines. John and I we saw the beginning of this in our career. So people are like, oh my God, virtual machines, look at all those resources. So what I want you to do right now is whatever browser you're on, open up the task manager and tell me what resource utilizations you're getting per tab. Fair amount, right? Now, I went on to Yocto, which is one of the Linux distribution sites that is the preferred target for building embedded. They're using Alpine. You can tighten that up a lot too. And said, how small can I run a virtual machine, a Linux kernel? They have a nano Yocto distribution that relies on BusyBox, 3.1 meg. 3.1 meg. All right. Yeah. So compare that to what your browser tab is using. So basically, so is this a thing that you're going to see more of? Absolutely. We're
Yeah.
going to see more of this. So the things you can do about it: detect and restrict unauthorized Hyper-V usage. That's going to be a tough one because more and more we're going to be using virtualizations to eliminate the platform-based barriers. That's going to be a thing. Hunt for hidden lightweight VMs and abnormal virtualization artifacts, right? So look for, scan for VM config files, processes tied to virtualization services, and use EDR to flag NAT routed traffic coming from Hyper-V's default switch. The other thing you're going to have to do, and this is going to be really tough, is strengthen network level anomaly detection, which is look for signs of covert C2 inside of hidden normal flows. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Anomaly detection with encryption is really, really hard. This is an easier one though. Flag persistent connections from endpoints to unusual IPs and domains, even if they appear to originate from the host rather than the VM. You're going to have to start looking at where things are connecting and how long they're connecting. You're going to have to characterize it, implement behavioral analysis. That's what it is. If you start generating server-like traffic patterns, you got a problem. Here's the problem. Every one of these machines we're computing on, way more powerful than the servers we had 10 years ago.
Yep.
So this is going to be a tough one.
So I got a couple takeaways here is that we're seeing more and more novel ways of attacks from hackers. And they're coming up with using AI bots to just denial of service. They're coming up with inserting VMs. There's all these new ways. So our security folks, our security vendors need to get smarter as well. I would argue that your antivirus tools at this point should be reporting out VMs, especially if new VMs spin up. It should actually pop up. So did you mean to spin up this VM? That should be part of Windows Defender looking at Hyper-V. They should be integrated so that you would think that that would work. Is like, yes, I did spin that up because I need a VM on my desktop to do this. But anyway, but the good news is that this is limited to Windows 10, and hopefully you've moved on to Windows 11 at this point. But if you do have Windows 10 instances running, you definitely need to be aware of that.
Yeah, and the thing is, in the nature of, nobody would do that because it's too resource intensive. Not anymore.
Not anymore. Yeah, absolutely. So in my past, built network appliances, and we used BusyBox because it allowed us to run such a small distribution, a lightweight distribution, and get a lot done. And it's so easy to spin up. BusyBox just like it almost does all the work for you. So I would say that what we're using for operating systems today are so bloated compared to what you could do on a highly efficient OS that you would never notice this from a memory or CPU footprint standpoint.
And they're also ridiculously capable. So if you think it's impossible, probably isn't. Speaking of things that are possible.
So speaking of power, Nvidia is based in Santa Clara, California, just a little level set there. And Santa Clara as a city, is running out of power. They don't have enough power, and they have two major data center developments in the works that are being told you can't turn on because the city doesn't have enough power. Now, that in and of itself is not an enterprise IT story. Well, sort of is, but it impacts you. But what this is a cautionary tale for where we're heading, in that we know that there are hundreds of data centers about to be spun up as part of Project Stargate, and outside of that we're talking about trillions of dollars being spent on data centers across the world. And this is going to impact the grid. And in matter of fact, it's going to completely overwhelm the grid. So they can't do that. So they're going to need new forms of power. And that is almost guaranteed to be some form of nuke. It'll be spinning up old large-scale nuclear reactors like they are doing with Three Mile Island. It'll be putting in small modular. It'll be putting in those ones we talked about a few weeks ago where they're burying them down, a mile underground in a 30-inch hole. There's all these different ways they're going to have to do that. But this is coming. And the interesting part will be how quickly does it come, because there are regulations around spinning up a reactor. But will maybe some of those be bypassed? Is that going to be a problem if they're bypassed? Does that mean that corners are going to be cut? So there's a lot of things that are going on here. And again, something you need to pay attention to. Also, when it comes to listening to news items and how it impacts you, could also start impacting the cost of power. And you need to be aware of that as you're budgeting as we go forward.
And, you know, I know having discussed this, we're inevitably going to get people commenting on renewable energy, which we're fans of. We're
Yes.
absolutely fans of renewable energy. For those folks, I'd like to put this to you. If you were to get a solar plant and battery backup big enough to run one of these data centers, now I'm very familiar with Santa Clara. I grew up in the Silicon Valley. There's no room. So, right. But you could say it's very valid to say, well, what if I put it out in the Central Valley? Or what if I put it on the Pacific Ocean, floating in the ocean? Those are valid answers. Here's the problem. How are you going to move that power to where you need it?
Right.
It is as hard as it is to build a power plant. It is much harder to run new power lines through residential areas and or any city. The NIMBY levels are ridiculously out, which brings us to our feedback.
We definitely want to talk about feedback from our listeners, and we're actually seeing a significant increase in really interesting comments, even especially on LinkedIn. So that's actually great. So if you're on LinkedIn, definitely reach out to us. So first, Scott reached out to us on LinkedIn, and he was talking about the AI developments that we were talking about putting data centers in orbit. And his response was, this is fascinating development on the future of AI infrastructure that is no longer grounded. It's orbital. This changes the scale and speed of computation entirely. And he's absolutely right. This is a tipping point. We're about to see so many things change with the coming of AI, putting data centers in orbit, mining on the moon, all these other things that are coming, and then the eventual coming of quantum and fusion. This world is going to look very different in 10 years.
Very, very different. 20 years, it's going to be nuts. You know, we had another person commenting, Matt, on interesting conversation on the right note about space-based data centers and powers. And this individual is a space entrepreneur.
Right.
Probably pretty good handle on what's going on with the pricing. But I think that the issue is cost. Terrestrial data centers yield about 1 billion flops per dollar, 10 to the 9th. How can space-based data centers compete? Cost is always going to be the core issue. What I'm saying is my experience of working with power grids in a previous world, they're way more expensive than you think they are. It's not a matter of just slapping a new power plant onto the grid will handle it. Nuh-uh. You've got a lot of intermediate spaces that have to be upgraded, and that is really, really expensive. And it technically, it's far cheaper than floating an orbital data center until people get involved.
Yep. And if you look at the cost of putting things in orbit is coming down so dramatically with the work that SpaceX done, and then we're going to see Blue Origin get involved and others that start to get involved, then this cost is dropping dramatically. So I agreed with what Matt said.
Yes,
but it's getting cheaper every day, and this is going to be the future. So Dennis reached out to us on YouTube with a very fun comment regarding the same topic of putting data centers in orbit. And he watched this on Tuesday, which was Veterans Day here in the US. And he said, my biggest takeaway from this most excellent episode is you've got the day off. Go watch Moonraker. He said it was another fun one. Thanks, guys. So
I took the day off.
Yeah. So yeah, I spent the day with the kids. We actually went to the arcade. And I thought that was a great idea. You know, that was the height of cheesy Roger Moore Bond, and him in space with laser guns. I thought that was great. So I loved that. It
was so bad it was good.
Absolutely.
Really, watch it again.
So that is going to cover this episode. We couldn't do this podcast without listeners like you and the fellows that we just mentioned who really contributed and gave us some fun and interesting comments. We would love to hear what you think. Do you have another topics that you want us to cover? Do you want to correct us on something that we might have gotten wrong? Send email to feedback@itsparkcast.com or hit us up on X @itsparkcast. Or you can also hit us on LinkedIn, and I put those links to our LinkedIn profiles in the show notes so you can get that. If you're watching on YouTube, just like Dennis, you could leave a comment down below. We do read every single comment, every bit of feedback we get on all the platforms, and we respond to most. And if it's particularly interesting, insightful, or entertaining, we will read it out on our broadcast. You'll get to hear your name and comment there. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. That way you'll never miss an episode. And from the world of enterprise IT, until next time, take care.
Thanks for coming by. We'll have a fun week next week. I can't wait to get going.
I'm so glad I stuck with Windows 10.
So am I. Time to install Linux on your Hyper-V. Your Windows 10 will be mine.